Okay, all right, welcome. Welcome to House Human Services Committee. We are continuing our testimony on JRH 9, which is a joint resolution urging the American Speech Language and Hearing Association to reconsider its opposition to the rapid prompting method of communication instruction for students with apraxia of speech or autism. And we are joined by Diane Paul. And Diane, I'm going to have you, introduce the rest of your title and everything yourself. Ordinarily, for new witnesses, we would go all the way around the room, but we have too many people in the room to do that with. Thank you for being here, and we appreciate the ability to speak with you and to hear the association's thoughts about this. And I'm not sure if you're planning this or not, but there are folks in the room who do not know what rapid prompting method is. So we would appreciate a little primer on what exactly that is as well. So the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I am Diane Paul, and I'm the Senior Director for Clinical Services in Speech Language Pathology at the American Speech Language Hearing Association. I have a PhD in Communication Sciences and Disorders, and I am an ASHA certified speech language pathologist. I've also worked at ASHA for 37 years, and I was on the committee that developed ASHA's statements about facilitated communication or assisted typing, which is what you saw this morning, and the rapid prompting method. So I'm very happy to address this group. Thank you for inviting us. And I can have some prepared remarks and then answer any questions. But to start, I can define what the rapid prompting method is. A person holds up a letterboard, often stencils with letters, and the person points to, typically a non-speaking or minimally speaking person will point to the letters to spell particular words. You'll hear in my testimony that the concern is that somebody can inadvertently move the board and therefore influence the speaking or the communication of the person who is doing the pointing. Facilitated communication or assisted typing, it's different because, as you saw, the keyboard is stationary, and which is what we advocate for. It's part of what we call augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. And you heard that the letters are spoken by the computer, which is called speech generating device. What differs is that there's physical prompting. With rapid prompting method, there's not physical prompting, there's the movement of the letterboard that concerns us. The physical prompting, though, again, we have concern about, therefore, if there's prompting, who is actually the author of the communication. But those are the two differences between those methods. And what ASHA advocates for, and you'll hear me speak about this, first of all, procedures, techniques that are based on scientific evidence and have had research to prove that they are effective. And the augmentative and alternative communication systems that I mentioned, or AAC, which include letterboards, keyboards, even simply pointing to a picture. Those are the methods that we recommend, and there's some confusion because they're using the same devices. They're using letterboards and keyboards. The key difference is there's not physical prompting, and somebody is not holding the board up in the air and moving it, as in the case with rapid prompting method. So that's what I will talk about. So the reason I know this, the reason, bottom line, we have this statement not recommending the rapid prompting method is we have a concern about overuse of the prompts, which is holding the board, and the lack of any scientific evidence demonstrating that it's effective.
Thank you. I think that was that helpful to committee members to understand the method. Representative Eustis?
I guess the one thing I didn't quite understand with the witness when he was here is he seemed able to move of his own accord. So what is the point of the prompting? Why is that a concern?
I think just a second, Dr. Paul. I think it's an interesting choice of term, prompting, versus. We will also have some people who have a difference of opinion than what Asha is speaking of in terms of what purpose this serves with the neurodevelopment and physical, the physical ability. You saw with the witness this morning that he had vocalizations that were not under his control, essentially. And oftentimes, some people with autism have also neuro movement issues, and so we'll have witnesses that speak to that as well. So essentially, we're talking about the use of a letterboard essentially, and whether or not, and then we saw this morning the use of electronic communication device. Similar to an iPad, but a little more complicated than an iPad. Representative Bishop.
Just if I can get clarity, did you have the opportunity to see our witness earlier this morning?
I did see him. Unfortunately, I didn't see from the beginning, but I did see him. Yes.
I'm just trying to make sure I understood with the definitions or explanation you provided. Does what we saw today in that method of communication fall within or outside of what Asha would deem appropriate?
The physical prompting part. So the facilitator holding his arm is what we are concerned about, because then there's some question about to the degree to which the facilitator is influencing the communication. It's not, we have two statements. One is we don't recommend the use of the rapid prompting method, which is holding the letterboard in the air. We also have a statement not endorsing the use of facilitated communication, and assisted typing is a form of facilitated communication. There have been numerous studies. Our first statement about this was in 1995. And there's concern that the facilitator is doing the communicating. I am not speaking about this young man today. You asked, does he need the physical prompting? I don't know, but if it's faded, that's great. That's part of the typing, the speech generating device. That's all part of augmentative and alternative communication, and Asha strongly supports the use of keyboards, speech-generating devices, letterboards. The concern is a physical prompt that's not faded. because that means a person doesn't have the independence that they might need. And there are simple tests of authorship that would dispel any concerns at all. For instance, if the facilitator didn't hear the question, that's all that it would take. And then a person would type, and they type the correct answer to the question. No concern would we have with who's authoring the message. And that's the type of research that has not been conducted, and we don't completely understand the resistance to the research. So we fully support the research. We support the use of the tools like keyboards, letterboards. Our concern is with the overuse of physical prompts in the case of facilitated communication or assisted typing, or in the case of the rapid prompting method, which is what the resolution refers to, or RPM, the use of holding a letterboard up in the air where a person inadvertently, absolutely, we're not saying they do it on purpose, inadvertently might move or position or somehow cue the person to point to a particular letter. All we'd ask, if you put the board down in the case of rapid prompting method, or if you didn't have the physical prompt, the holding the arm, in the case of assisted typing, then what the people are doing is part of augmentative and alternative communication, which ASHA strongly supports. We also support research in these methods.
Sure.
So let's let Dr. Paul give her testimony, and then we'll follow up with questions. How's that? Okay. And then
Thank you.
Dr. Paul, would also be great if you could forward that to Lori Morse, your testimony after
Okay, I
after we're done.
believe it already has
Oh, you
been,
do?
but I'll
Okay.
be glad to follow up and make sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, on behalf of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, or ASHA, I want to comment on House Joint Resolution 9 by clarifying ASHA's position on the rapid prompting method, or RPM, and providing guidance grounded in scientific evidence, ethical practice, and the protection of individuals with communication disabilities. ASHA is the National Professional Scientific and Credentialing Association for 247,000 members, certificate holders, and affiliates who are audiologists, speech language pathologists, or SLPs, speech language and hearing scientists, audiology assistants, and SLPAs, or speech language pathology assistants, and students. And more than 500 ASHA members reside in Vermont. Now I'll speak to ASHA's position on the rapid prompting method. ASHA does not recommend to our speech language pathologists the use of RPM due to a lack of scientific validity and concerns regarding prompt dependency and authorship. So information obtained through RPM should not be assumed to reflect the authentic communication of a person with a disability, because another individual remains actively involved in shaping their response in real time. The central concern is not the use of spelling, letterboards, keyboards, or motor supports. ASHA is not opposed to spelling or letterboards and strongly supports augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, and literacy and spelling instruction. The critical issue is authorship. Who is generating the message? When another person controls or significantly influences the communication process, we cannot be confident that the words produced are truly those of the individual. This uncertainty carries serious risks, including misattributed messages that can impact education, healthcare decisions, family relationships, consent, and legal determinations. So what does ASHA support? We support communication approaches that aim to build independent, self-directed communication. We support the use of supports that increase access without determining content, that include robust AAC, literacy and spelling instruction, partner modeling, systematic teaching, and prompt fading. And we support a focus on functional, spontaneous communication across real life. We also support multimodal communication, and this includes gestures, manual signs, picture communication systems, speech generating devices, keyboards, letterboards. Those are all part of AAC. And then we support use of these, particularly when the method is clearly authored by the communicator. AAC then encompasses all the ways that an individual may communicate without relying on spoken language. And that includes no-tech, low-tech, and high-tech options. Partners play an important role in supporting access and participation, but best practice requires transparency and prioritizes approaches that fade support and protect autonomy. And this is why we draw a clear line. ASHA certified professionals are ethically required to use evidence-based practices supported by the best available scientific evidence. Approaches such as RPM and other facilitator-dependent methods are considered pseudoscientific because they do not meet these standards and raise unresolved authorship questions. Communication is a human right, including the right to express messages that are truly one's own. Presuming potential means expanding access while protecting independence, autonomy, and authorship. The difference between evidence-based approaches under the rubric of AAC and facilitator-dependent methods is a major clinical and ethical distinction. Evidence-based intervention teaches communication that becomes independent over time and generalizes beyond a scripted or highly supported interaction. Facilitator-dependent methods do not. We also have a family-centered perspective. ASHA deeply respects and empathizes with families who want the best for their children. This position is not about blame or questioning families' hopes. Rather, it's about ensuring that families receive clear, accurate, scientific-based information so they can make informed decisions. We want more communication, not less, but we also need communication supports that protect the individual's autonomy and authenticity. We also recognize, as autistic advocates have long emphasized, that limiting an individual to a single communication option restricts choice. Therefore, ASHA promotes a multimodal approach that allows individuals to select what works best for them across environments. Excuse me. So, in conclusion, ASHA advocates for the rights of individuals. All these things are popping up, I'm sorry. Okay. ASHA advocates for the rights of individuals across this nation, including students with apraxia of speech or autism, to be understood and to express their wants, needs, ideas, and identities through communication methods that are ethical, evidence-based, and truly their own. For these reasons, ASHA does not recommend RPM or similar facilitated dependent approaches and encourages policies that provide and prioritize proven independent communication supports. Thank you so much for this opportunity to provide this information. ASHA remains available as a resource to support informed policymaking that protects individuals with communication disabilities and the families that support them.
Thank you,
And I'm
Dr.
happy
Paul.
to answer questions.
Thank you. I guess I think we probably might have quite a few, but I'm going to ask one question first, and then we have a couple of hands coming up here. And I'm just wondering if you are familiar with the peer-reviewed studies that our previous witness shared with us. I mean, you know, there's a number of peer-reviewed studies about the things that you know, that you were just speaking of.
I did not hear that part. I didn't hear any discussion of the studies. When we did our position statement, we did a systematic review of the literature and came up with what's known as an empty review. There were no scientific studies that involved rapid prompting method. The systematic review has been repeated just this year. It is in press, but what has been published is the protocol for testing authorship. And again, the systematic review revealed no scientific studies that met the criteria of the systematic review related to the rapid prompting method.
Okay, thank you. Representative Cole.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. My question is, what kinds of speech assistance would ASHA endorse for folks who have what the previous witness described as like low muscle tone for speech assistance, especially given skepticism around a facilitator?
Okay. First of all, not every child or person with autism has a motor problem.
Yes.
And although apraxia of speech is a motor speech disorder, person doesn't necessarily have apraxia throughout their body. So this is what I say for the rapid prompting method. Our concern is holding the letterboard up in the air. If someone can point while the board is held up in the air, that means they have the physical motor control to point. So all we ask is if the person wants it at eye level, put it on a stationary device, prop it up on a computer, a music stand, or put it down. Put the letterboard or the keyboard down like it was this morning. Then you're not moving it around, and pointing this way or pointing down to a keyboard, it's the same motor behavior.
Madam Chair, if I could follow
Yes.
up here. So of course, I'm very well aware that, you know, people with autism do not all have the same motor, you know, abilities, and there's a wide range happening there. But my question is for that subsection of folks who do, you know, have less of an ability to have motor function, you know, for example, like, I guess what does ASHA recommend? Do you know what I'm trying to ask here?
Yes, like I said, that the same, if somebody can point, it's the same motor control to point to letters on a stationary device as it is to point to a keyboard. And a keyboard, that it doesn't take much motor control to press the keys on a typewriter. And then the speech is generated by
Yeah.
pointing. It was very, and with facilitated communication, that has shown through authorship studies, there have been numerous studies demonstrating that is the facilitator that's moving their arm. And again, I am not talking about Chris, he was typing, it was generating the sounds. Whether he needed that physical prompt or not, I don't know. But our concern, that wasn't about rapid prompting method. That's not what I was testifying about.
Yes, thank you. A follow-up question that I have, and it's sort of related to Representative Cole's question, is what I am hearing from Asha is specifically around speech. And what I not understanding is whether or not your members are also considering the impact of accompanying disabilities that an individual may have. So not only their inability to speak, but the impacts of their autistic behaviors, or the impact of maybe other learning disabilities or other physical disabilities. In developing your statement, is there consideration for the impact of other disabilities on your research?
Without a doubt, we certainly are not focused just on speech. That's the sound production. Focused on communication. We focus on the whole person. We recognize that, for instance, it's very rare that somebody just has a speech production problem without also having a language problem. We also, speech being the sound production and language being the way you put together ideas to communicate to another person. And language can be verbal or nonverbal. And we recognize that people with autism, with childhood apraxia of speech, may have other problems and learning problems or other physical types of problems. That would not change our position. And we took that into consideration too. We were certainly thinking about the whole person. And again, if somebody is holding a letterboard in the air and someone can point to letters, then just put it down, and that shows that somebody could communicate independently. We also believe strongly in teaching literacy skills and in teaching spelling skills. And often with the rapid prompting method, it has been said that the use of the letterboard reveals unknown and spelling abilities that have not been taught. Or
Yeah, I understand.
yeah.
Okay. Are there any final questions for this witness this morning? Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. We appreciate your availability on relatively short notice, and thank you for the information you've shared. And we look forward to discussing this further in committee.
May I say a concluding remark?
Of course.
Thank you. I just want you to know the American Speech Language Hearing Association is 100 years old. And as I've said, I have been well, I've been a member for half that time, and I've been working at ASHA for 37 years. In that time, ASHA has taken a position not recommending a particular approach 3 times. We take this very seriously. For us to make a recommendation to 247,000 people, we have to be absolutely certain. We have to know for sure about the evidence and what we are recommending to our speech language pathology community. So I just want you to know we do not take this lightly. We understand the concerns of families who want an approach that's effective, and we want to make sure that families are getting evidence-based treatment that they need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the witness and thank you, committee. We are going to now switch topics. And I don't see Ashley. Okay, all right, okay. We're now moving on to the Human Services Board and reviewing Act 22 report, report required for Act 22, which is on our website. Hi, Ashley, come on in. I'm sorry, the witness chair is now going to need to be vacated. Because we have a witness going to sit there. Okay, so welcome, Ashley.
Thank you.
Members, I don't know, Ashley, if you have anything that you want to be up on the screen or not, or.
Brendan's going
You
to
got it, okay.
handle that for me. You have a packed house.
We do, we do. Okay. Committee members, I'm just gonna remind you, last year we took quite a bit of testimony on the Human Services Board. And what we ended up doing, this was a bill that was sponsored by Representative Fawn, you might remember. That we ended up asking them to go back to answer some questions that we put forth, and to really sort of think about how we might really look at the function of the Human Services Board across the Agency of Human Services, as well as how it interacts with the appellants, the people who are bringing their appeal to the Human Services Board. And so we have a report on our website, and we have Ashley here to discuss that and recommendations that are coming as a result. Also, we are going to be hearing from Joe Reinert, who is I guess he's the Chief Human Services Board Hearing Officer, next week. Thank you for being here, Ashley. And you have a packed house of students from a couple of different high schools here for Prevention Day. So they get to see democracy in action and get to see what happens in the witness chair and around.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me.
You are democracy.
Oh,
You are
gosh.
democracy.
Right now. I will also do my best to not use acronyms since we have
That's
so many
great.
folks watching. So when you asked the agency to look at the Human Services Board and all of our processes last year, it was quite an undertaking. So you have an extensive report, which is why I think going through some highlights might be helpful. We did go through and really nail down what was happening with each agency or each department, because as you know, we have 5 departments that have hearings in front of the Human Services Board. So there is a breadth of information that they're seeing, and it's coming from different angles. It's coming from different policies that are being implemented, and it's coming with different timelines, different federal regulations. So there's a lot that this encompasses. So with that, what we came up with were a few recommendations for the committee to consider, and then we went through some of the questions that the committee had asked, and tried to find thoughtful ways for assisting with procedure, so making it clearer, and then also assisting with appellants' understanding of the process and how we could make that happen.
Ashley, could you just describe your role. I'm not sure everybody like really understands what general counsel for AHS means.
I jumped in. Yeah. So my name is Ashley Johns. I'm general counsel for the Agency of Human Services. The Agency of Human Services is the umbrella agency that covers all 6 of our departments. So things like the Department of Mental Health, Public Health, Department of Children and Families, 3 others. And
Disabilities, aging and independent living, corrections. Yeah, we can.
yes, there's a lot of them. And I'm the attorney that represents that agency. So we work with all 6 of those departments. And in this particular situation, the legislature asked us to look at one of our boards, Human Services Board, that hears hearings on anyone's benefits determinations. So individuals that have a problem with a benefits determination can bring that case to the Human Services Board and have an independent arbiter look at their case. And so what we had to do was really dig in, because 6 different departments, 5 of them go in front of this board, and all in very different ways. And so that's what we did. I think we can probably breeze through the first couple slides, since the legislature knows what they charged us to do.
I'm going to assume that, actually. I think we should back up and it's, once a bill leaves our esteemed body, I think especially that last part, when we asked you what specifically to look at is helpful.
Walk through it. So the legislature asked us to walk through we've met with the Human Services Board, the Office of the Attorney General, community partners, and then we tried to reach out to people who had experience in front of the board through those community partners, so that we had all the angles looking at what was being presented. And then what we were asked to submit was recommendations to the legislature on attorney training, appeals processes, data collection, resolution of appeals, and any additional legislative changes to improve the system. And I will tell you, our presentation goes bottom up, essentially.
Okay.
So we're starting with broad legislative changes and then working our way down to your specific questions.
So I have a question, because when we said, interested individuals or whatever that phrase is that we use, to get input from folks. So in your report, when I read your report, you highlighted Vermont Legal Aid and Homelessness Vermont as they agreed or they didn't agree. And I'm just wondering, could you say a little bit more about, the report didn't really delineate how you gained stakeholder input, so did you reach out to designated agencies, to people who had been before the Human Services Board, all of that kind of?
So we held a public meeting, noticed the public meeting. That doesn't always get a whole lot of input. So because that didn't get a whole lot of input, we asked Vermont Legal Aid and then End Homelessness Vermont to reach out to their constituencies and see what input they had based on those interactions. Because it was difficult to get someone directly to provide us with information to inform the report.
So did you ask each department, did you ask them to contact their community partners? So I'm thinking of like Dale, for instance, has area agencies on aging, home health agencies, designated agencies, did you ask them to reach out to their community partners who have gone through the process?
No, so we posted it publicly, but we really leaned on folks who had been working with the communities that are represented in front of the Human Services Board, since they're, especially, and Homelessness Vermont's going to have that in-depth, like one-on-one communication with someone so that they could provide us with that input.
Well, we certainly do know that End Homelessness Vermont has been a frequent flyer representing, hundreds of people there, or acting as an assistant to them there. So I do feel like probably you've got some people with lived experience access. I was just also wondering about other community partners, because, legal aid, while they're, somewhat of a community partner, they're not the actual service providers. They may or may not represent somebody there or provide advice to people who are there. So, okay, it's helpful to know actually who provided that input.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
And so then we can go over a brief overview. So the Human Services Board is a citizen panel. It includes 7 members. They serve as Fair Hearing Board. It's difficult to say. And the board has hearing officers that make recommendations that go to the board. Those are reviewed by the board, the decision of the hearing officer, and they can affirm, modify, or reverse that decision. And then there are certain decisions that have further oversight in our office with Secretary, TANF, Child Support, Medicaid. and the Vermont Health Benefit Exchange. So AHS identified 4 broad areas for legislative attention. One is the HSB authority and jurisdiction. The second one is the consistency of hearings and consistency of experience. The timelines, which are a really serious pain point for us, I think, in terms of Medicaid. So I have a lot to talk about there. And then something that was interesting that we found was related to child victim testimony. So there is a delineation based on age as to when children would have to testify in front of the Human Services Board. And we're proposing a blanket exception. It's a narrow subset of cases where that would happen. And it is, I think, far more traumatic than it is beneficial based on what we were able to uncover. Generally, we wanted to strengthen the fairness, predictability, and efficiency of the HSB appeals process while protecting those vulnerable appellants and then safeguarding our state and federal program integrity to ensure that we're not creating a situation where something that we're doing is going to lose funds for the state, especially in the Medicaid space right now. So the authority and jurisdiction is a broad ask. So interpreted broadly right now, the statute related to HSB is being used to essentially create policy. So what the HSB is designated to do is hear those individual appeals. So a single person comes before the board with a single problem about their eligibility. And when we're talking about the HSB making broad overarching decisions that they think can apply to cases regardless of what the facts are, we're stepping outside of that individual benefits determination and we're starting to make broad policy. It's really usurping legislative intent, judicial authority, and is much better situated in those 2 venues than in the HSB. Vermont is an outlier in terms of the way our statute is at least being utilized right now. So Massachusetts has a pretty strict limitation on what their HSB can decide, making it individual benefit determinations, and the same thing in Pennsylvania. So really limiting that scope so that when we're making overarching policy decisions, it's something that is made with a systems approach rather than one individual case that's causing a policy decision to snowball from that case.
Can you say a little bit more about that? I'm trying to, in reading the report, I saw the examples of the language from Massachusetts and one other state. I don't remember.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Okay. I didn't really understand Pennsylvania's language. Massachusetts seemed more logical to me, but so what I'm trying to understand is it the role of the Human Services Board to say, okay, here's the State Department, here's the department, here's the policy, or here's the rule that the person is appealing, and isn't it their role to see whether that rule or policy has been applied correctly?
To the individual person. So I think what we're finding is more of a broad overarching decision based on like a disagreement with the way the rule is being interpreted by the agency. And we're recommending it be clear that the legislature, for example, or the federal government is making the law. The agency is interpreting it. There's deference to the agency's interpretation. And what the Human Services Board role is when that person comes forward with a set of facts, they look at that set of facts and say, is this applied appropriately? Is this following the state's policy? Is this following the law that's informing that policy? Not, is that policy what we would want the policy to be, or is that policy appropriate? Right. It's supposed to be an individual fact-based determination, and that's not always what we're seeing.
Okay, so because what I'm trying to distinguish between is whether or not what I hear you saying is that AHS is believing that the Human Services Board is creating policy in their rulings, as opposed to interpreting whether the policy that exists already has been applied correctly.
Correct.
And so, we know from recent experience that there's been a lot of similar cases to go before the Human Services Board, and they've been making a similar ruling in each one of those cases. And is your interpretation at AHS that they're making policy or that they're interpreting policy in those, the GA housing ones are the ones that, have had a large volume in the last year. Are you saying that you believe that HSB is actually making policy in that case versus interpreting existing policy?
Making policy in that case.
Okay.
because it's not fact-based.
No,
So
I'm
it's not
just saying, okay, I understand your response. I'm not saying, okay, I agree with it.
I
I just want
understand.
to be clear.
Just because it's not about the individual person and their individual circumstances. I think there are absolutely housing cases that should be in front of the HSB. This is not to say that housing cases should not. But those should be the cases where it's, does this person's individual disability qualify them for housing? Not what was the legislature's intent when they wrote 80 days into the law. That's something that the agency interpreted. The agency created a policy and there should be deference to the agency's policy.
Okay, I'm understanding what you mean.
Yeah. So generally, our recommendation there then is to really clarify in statute what that HSB authority looks like. So we have that clarity, not only for the agency, but also for appellants. We're bringing the right cases to the HSB as compared to bringing the right cases to the judiciary, because that would be a challenge, I think, that's appropriate for the judiciary. If you don't believe that the agency appropriately interpreted the law, the judiciary should absolutely weigh in on that. This outlines some of the legal risks, policy risks in general, related to not making this change. So we're undermining separation of powers, which I outlined a little bit. There are policy risks when we are not talking about a comprehensive analysis. So we don't want that one individual fact-based case to change what our policy is statewide. We want to be making that policy decision with our community experts, with our clinical experts who have experience in that specific area. There's a lot of inefficiency and confusion that agencies have to adjust operations based on isolated rulings when this happens. And we want to make sure we have public confidence in administering the process. There are financial risks that I think we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about the timeliness piece as well. But generally right now, when we're looking, I think Medicaid is a great example of that fraud, waste, and abuse aspect. We really have to make sure that our procedures and policies are in compliance with federal law so that we are not putting Medicaid dollars at risk.
I think one of the things that I think is, this is also important as legislators, and particularly in this committee and in the healthcare committee, because those are the two main committees that deal with the Agency of Human Services, is us also being clear in legislation about what is intended. And so that we try to, I think, we try to strike a balance, not always successful at it, but try to strike a balance between being too prescriptive and then allowing flexibility in implementation. And it's a interesting line to try to walk, especially when you have to think about it from the perspective of the individual recipient, the Vermonter out there, trying to access those supports and services. And, I think you're raising good questions for us to be thinking about and how we frame these things, but also in the kind of guidance and oversight that we provide to the various departments in AHS about what the intent was and whether the rules and policies that get implemented as a result of that legislation are really meeting the intent. So,
and I think we'll get to this a little bit later, but that really speaks to, we have a recommendation that there is a guide for Vermonters who are in front of this board in plain language that really outlines what all of this means. So if there are changes made, if there are prescriptive rules put in, that someone who's coming without an attorney can really understand the process, especially before they get there. Because once you're there, we understand that this is their benefit, right? Like it's something that they think that they need or that they do need. And we need to make sure that they have an understanding of what that process looks like. It also gets the agency clearer information at that point, right? Like there are benefit determinations that we will find internally when we did our reviews that someone just didn't give us the right documentation or the right paperwork for that benefit. So we do have that internal appeal step that's before we get into this formal HSB process where we can call and talk to the person and say, this is all great information, but we're missing something signed by a doctor and we need that something signed by a doctor to give you this benefit and get that documentation before we have to take them to any sort of hearing process.
Did you find that all of the departments and all of the programs that have the HSB as an appeal step all have that, sort of pre-HSB process for each program?
It is widely varied, I will say, based on what the program is and how it looks. I think the most comprehensive program exists in DEVA because of Medicaid compliance. So they have a very robust appeals process that happens before something gets to the Human Services Board. And I forget the number, but I want to say it's something like 80% of cases out of DEVA don't make it to hearing, which is great. I think the place that probably has the least, and it's because of the expedited hearings, is housing. Their process is minimal. So Vermont is recommending, I've jumped ahead, I guess. So Vermont's recommending aligning the administrative hearing authority with the nationwide norms to protect legal clarity, fairness, federal compliance, state budgets, and statewide policy integrity. It just lays out the principles I think that we've already talked about, but just in general, making sure that we have that really clear authority and what is and is not happening in front of the Human Services Board. Our second recommendation was related to consistency. So what we found is there are some inconsistencies, especially failures to meet decision deadlines that are creating a lack of predictability. They're risking benefit continuity. They add administrative burden to the agency, and they're resulting in financial consequences for both appellants and the agency in the state. And I think that was something really big that we noted. So specifically in the Medicaid context, and I'm certain I'm jumping ahead again, but specifically in the Medicaid context, we have decisions that are just lingering right now. And those decisions lingering have really major impactful consequences for the state, but also for the appellant. So if we had one we found in 2024, which was the year that we took a look at all of our data for Medicaid, where we overpaid by about $12,000 for one individual in benefits. The burden to the state, it creates a Medicaid complication because we're obviously using Medicaid funds for this, but it also, there is a statute that allows us to recoup those funds from someone who's been overpaid. We're not generally enacting that statute right now. It's a federal rule or federal statute. We're not generally using it because we know that a lot of the folks that are in front of this board are overburdened, are not financially stable. And so we're in a position right now where that is optional. I do not know that the federal government is going to continue that being optional, or if Vermont's budget constraints can allow that continue to be optional. But there are also tax implications for someone who received benefits, especially something that was that large. And then they have a tax complication later in the year when they're filing their taxes because it's not the same type of funding that they received when it's determined that they shouldn't have had that benefit at that point. So what we are recommending to address some consistency issues is really formalizing the HSB hearing process. We really want to make the process understandable from the beginning and not after the problems arise. Publishing timelines, standardizing filings, and having really clear hearing expectations was something that was recommended by all of our teams. We recommended adopting formal procedures through either rulemaking or legislation, and then specifically outline formalizing strict timelines, including standards for continuances, impartiality requirements, formal procedures, form filings, were something that kind of got added in at the end, but would make things more efficient, even for appellants who don't have an attorney. If there's a form that they can file instead of having to just call or figure out what they need to tell someone, especially things with like check boxes, the way small claims courts function, might make this easier for folks to enter into. And then actually, I think, Sherwood, you had specifically asked about finding a way for folks to make a statement. And we really sat down and thought about what that would look like. And our recommendation is a closing statement. So it's after the close of evidence, which means it's not considered evidence. So it's less likely to harm their position. It's also less likely to be a situation where they've now said something that the agency needs to respond to and you end up in a bunch of back and forth. So after the close of evidence, giving a limited time, because we also don't want to overburden the HSB, maybe a 5-minute closing statement, so that they have the ability as the appellant to just tell their story for 5 minutes and be heard. But all of the evidence has already been presented. It does give some similarity then to like a court system where you've already presented the evidence, but everyone can say, well, this is what the evidence shows you, and here's what I think you should decide based on that. And that would also be something really easy to explain to an appellant because we have enough court procedurals that people are watching that like a closing statement is something that's well known. And we can explain that in this document we're proposing to really explain the process to our appellants that are in front of the board.
And it would give, as you said, the opportunity for an individual or their representative to speak uninterrupted.
Mhm.
That was something we kept hearing over and over again,
Yes.
is that the AHS attorneys kept interrupting them or kept trying to dispute what they were saying. And so, okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I'm wondering what conversation may have taken place about, as I sit here, I'm just thinking at close, they do get an opportunity to say their piece,
Mhm.
but in some sense, it's too late to influence the process. If they had the opportunity for an opening statement, I understand AHS would then may want to respond, et cetera. But may that not set the stage for them to say in plain language
Mhm.
to the adjudicators, to the
So
board?
I was very open to an opening statement as well. I will say advocates were concerned about either. And so the balance, because they were concerned that the appellant, especially someone unrepresented, would say something that would harm their case. Especially, I think the concern arose a lot around substantiations of either child abuse or adult, like elder abuse. And so we thought if we suggest it be a closing statement, it's at least at the close of evidence, so it's less likely to harm their position. But I do think an opening presents the same option, right? It's not considered evidence, but it does lay out what you're going to present. It's something that the other side wouldn't have to object to because both individuals can have those 5 minutes. So I think an opening statement is absolutely an option, but I do think advocates had some concerns that we were trying to weigh here.
Skip over secretary reversal.
Oh, sorry. And secretary reversal. So we are recommending secretary reversal in all cases from a consistency perspective, so that there is that consistent outcome where if there is a decision that the secretary needs to reverse, and there are limited circumstances, we talked about this last year, it's only if it's not following the law, that could occur and then have court intervention as compared to right now where those cases skip that step.
And it's only a limited number of, I mean, it's
We're about 50-50, I think, right now.
about 50-50
In terms of
percent of the,
We'd have to run the numbers, but there are 4 or 5 types that have secretary reversal and then the remainder do not.
most of them, in my experience have been, I guess I should, most of them deal with Medicaid that have the, or programs run by the other departments that are also Medicaid that get the secretary.
Also, interestingly, TANF, so something we highlighted in the report was the distinction between TANF and SNAP in that area was quite a concern, because we did have that federal issue this year with SNAP, wondering about what that would look like and if that would bring some influx of cases. Ultimately, that did not transpire, thank goodness. Our Vermonters still have SNAP benefits.
Yep.
But the difference between TANF and SNAP,
Yeah.
to the extent that, the difference between TANF and SNAP is we couldn't figure out why one and not the other.
Yeah.
Timeliness, which I've already mentioned 3 or 4 times because it is the big pain point for us right now. We're recommending mandatory deadlines that are not only, because they're already in federal law. So we really need something to make this happen. There's a 90-day deadline for Medicaid decisions, and our agency is waiting sometimes 30, sometimes 300 days past those 90 days. And the state funds benefits for the duration,
Mhm.
which puts that financial burden on, again, both the state and the individual when we have this issue for recoupment or tax issues. We recommended deciding cases in the order either received or that hearings happen, because we have some cases that decisions are issued very quickly. And then we have other cases that linger for 300 days, even of the same type of case. Increased HSB meeting frequency. So right now, all of the hearing officers hold their hearings, and then they have to have the hearing decision go in front of the HSB board, the full board, to make a decision, and the board only meets once a month. They've cited a really large increased caseload. I think it makes sense for the board to be meeting more frequently and to be making decisions so that we can continue to keep these cases moving.
So I'm seeing some of these things and I'm, the dollar signs are running in my head. So is AHS prepared to increase the budget of the Human Services Board in order to accomplish these things?
That is something I would have to take back. That's not something I have any authority to, or have even inquired, if I'm being honest.
I'm just, it's an obvious thing. I'm
Sure.
just like, so, I'm sure that we will hear from Joe that, sure, they would love to be able to do all of those things. And if they had more resources and or fewer cases, which we might be able to do something about the fewer cases, but the way things are going at the federal level, I'm not sure fewer cases are in our future.
Right. I do think something too, especially when I was focusing on the jurisdiction piece, is that that fact-based hearing and not making those overarching decisions is, there was one case that really came up while I was reviewing that we had a 10-hour fact-based hearing. And then they made a decision that wasn't based on the facts. It was one of those GA like overarching law decisions. And so that seems like we should really make sure that we're focusing on fact-based decisions if we're holding that long of a fact-based hearing, because that is a major amount of time that we've had the petitioner there, we've had whoever there was representing them, if they were represented, plus state time and HSP time. So if there's a way to narrow that, we even contemplated time limits on hearings. But I do think because they're so fact-based, we would have a really hard time coming up with what that time limit would be.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I just wonder, I understand that's AHS's interpretation that they weren't fact-based decisions.
Mhm.
My guess is that the Human Services Board would disagree with that interpretation. But we'll hear from them.
Sure, they may. And then we had proposed the potential of an independent efficiency assessment to see if there was anything in terms of process, procedure, hearing types that we could really help with streamlining.
And I think you make a good point that this isn't just about AHS. It does put the people appealing at risk as well. I think that's not something that people necessarily think about when they think about timeframes. Right. Or thinking about, well, we need to take all the time that we need, or that, but it does. Right. Especially, I think with the current federal administration, I think that you're probably, as soon as they catch up to the fact that that's optional, I'm sure that at some point it won't be optional. I understand the concern there.
Mm-hmm. And then this was our fourth recommendation that was just an interesting find. So we're recommending amending the statute to protect all child victims. Specifically, our report recommends prohibiting the requirement that any child victim or witness testify in abuse or neglect substantiation hearings, regardless of age, preventing that traumatization, and then really emphasizing protecting child welfare.
So, is it a requirement? I guess that's my question. Or is it something that is, I heard you say that there's an age distinction.
There is.
And we'll have to dig into this a little bit more, because I know that there is some, in the judiciary, I'm remembering some laws that we passed around age of child victims and requirements to testify in court and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if there's something that we can learn or apply from that.
Sure. I can tell you the statute if it's helpful. So it was 33 VSA 4916B. And that current law allows hearsay statements from children under age 12 to be admitted if they're sufficiently trustworthy. So the child doesn't have to come in and testify.
Yeah.
Children from ages 13 to 15 testify unless it would cause trauma or the child is physically unavailable. The situation that they had run into that I think this came up in was a case where they had asked the child to come in. Someone had, I assume the person who was arguing against the substantiation wanted the child's testimony. And that's just re-traumatizing them. Not only are we asking them to testify for presumably a second time because they've already given the statement to the investigators, but in front of the person who's alleged to have abused them.
Yeah.
And so I don't think especially when we read there was already a carve out for if it would cause trauma, like that would be every child. So I don't know why we wouldn't just apply it full cloth for children 18 and under.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So additional areas of the report addressed that were requested, one was training and education. So the committee had specifically asked about training for attorneys who represent the agency. And what we found in review is we think that having education for the people coming before the board, those appellants, is going to be a much more comprehensive answer to that problem. Attorneys already have ethical requirements. They already have trainings that they have to attend. There were about 17 trainings I think I was able to find that were trauma-informed, specific trainings for lawyers.
I saw that list of trainings, but there's nothing that compels attorneys to go to those trainings. I mean, how many of the AHS attorneys went to those trainings?
I don't know how many went to this training.
Yeah, I mean, so the availability of training is great, wonderful, but I think we have multiple examples of where people were not acting in a trauma-informed way towards the appellant, and the people representing the appellant. And, I think, I have to say that was sort of one of the recommendations that stood out to me as, being a little bit deaf, to the experiences of people. And I 100% agree that having more materials available to the appellant about what's going to happen, that this really is kind of a quasi-judicial situation. And, we even talked with Joe about a video, offered him some resources about who could help make those videos and the kinds of materials that would be helpful. And I really hope that we were able to implement some of that stuff. But I think it really, I'm not sure that all of the AHS attorneys or assistant AGs who represent AHS in those situations. And I think sometimes, I'm just going to say, they get caught up in the moment, and some of that stuff just doesn't translate to the experiences that we heard about. So I
will say we struggled weighing it. So we have the zealous advocacy requirement that attorneys have to meet, right?
Of course, right.
And from my understanding, generally, attorneys should not be having a whole host of communications with these folks outside of hearings.
Right.
So we're really talking about in the hearing, in the moment where they have to represent the agency.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that would be really difficult to weigh, in terms of having an idea of what trauma-informed behavior is certainly helpful, but it doesn't change the fact that those attorneys still have to object and still have to make arguments that aren't going to be heard well by the person. So we thought educating the person beforehand, this is what an objection is, here's what it means, no one's personally attacking you, it has to be done because of the law. That kind of an outline would give the person a better understanding. But we didn't find any trainings that we could come up with that would really speak to both a trauma-informed way that you're treating clients, because that's what a lot of the trauma-informed trainings are, right? Are folks who represent clients. In my past life, I represented domestic violence survivors. And so there was a whole host of trainings about how to interact with those individuals, but you're representing them. So you're really talking to them about trauma as compared to having to be in the opposite chair, not wanting them to have something that they're seeking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be helpful, if in whatever materials we're able to produce for the appellants as a result of this work, for them to understand that the opposing attorney may say things that are going to, feel uncomfortable to them. And I think from, speaking with the now retired former representative from Barrytown, that was an eye opener for him in terms of how people were, how he felt the people that he was there with were treated. And I get the whole, I remember us having this long conversation about zealous representation. And understanding that. I do think that materials that for the appellants could go a long way to helping people understand what to expect when they get there. But I also think that, zealous is one thing. I'm not asking people to step down from their zealous representation, just asking them to be a little more aware, I guess, of the impact of how they can represent people. Just saying that.
Understand. So we had proposed creating that plain language educational materials with the HSB, the VLA, including other stakeholders to get that input, but really having those three as the focus, open to alternative suggestions, but that would give it the legal framework we need to really outline those legal terms in plain language. And then also having both VLA and AHS, so folks that have been on either side of the HSB, have that ability to review what we're explaining.
I really encourage you to utilize Green Mountain Self Advocates as a resource. It's an organization that has done this across the country for other people, and they're right here in Vermont.
Okay.
And they take complex procedures and exactly like this. And they put it in simple terms. They use pictures, they use videos. And I'm sure for, not a huge amount of money, you'll be able to, they would be happy to assist with this. And they are excellent at doing it. They have a lot of experience doing it. And I think we even looked at small claims court.
Is that who did small claims?
I don't know if they did the small claims one or not, but
Okay.
that's another good example
It was.
of how to, create something that is going to be user friendly for people of, maybe fourth grade reading and above,
Right.
so. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Are you going to devote some resources to this? That resource question again.
No,
Gotcha.
so many resource questions. I'm just the lawyer.
That's what Representative Donahue would say. Don't do math.
I don't. I'm asking the lawyer. I have fiscal to do math for me.
Yeah.
There was a request for data collection information. And we recommended expanding the HSB's existing case management system, which I'm sure accompanies with a resource question. They do already have it, though. They do already have a system that I think could have an expanded use.
The reports, yeah.
Yeah. And so following the judiciary model, tracking the types of appeals, the timeliness of decisions, the continuances, board decisions, and then that would give us a good idea of workload indicators, like how many cases are they seeing? What do these look like? How long are we waiting for decisions on them? And I think that might help with some of the systemic and more pattern that we're seeing here. The internal department appeals processes, if you want to read the lengthy appendix we attached, it does outline each department's individual appeals process. But broadly, we talked about this a little bit. I think everyone has some process. I don't know that it exists so much in the housing space because of that rapid turnaround to get the case in front of the HSB. I think Divas is a great example for us to use to start expanding others because they are having a huge success in keeping like 80% of cases. I can look up the number, but something like 80% of cases to not even hit the HSB.
Yeah.
Because they are catching those errors and fixing things and even just letting appellants know, like, this isn't a benefit that you can be eligible for because of X. Like maybe we need to send you somewhere else for a different benefit. But those processes really vary. So we don't have, what I will say is one of the asks was about data for those processes and what that looks like. We don't have comprehensive comparable data because every process is so different.
Yeah.
So we've got data from specific departments and we can look at it that way, but comparing DIVA to housing cases is never going to be something that's useful for all of us.
So, is it useful for AHS to say, okay, internal reviews, should have these 5 elements or these, at a minimum, these 5 steps or these 4 steps? So that, because, we have clients out there that go across the Agency of Human Services. And so, if they're appealing Medicaid or they're appealing Dale decision or they're appealing a DCF decision, and they get a different process every time, it would be helpful if there was at least some consistency in the type of step that needs to occur. Like if there's always a commissioner review, or if there's, always X, Y, and Z. I don't know what they all are, but because, you found in your own research that they were so differing, it seems as though there could be some things that would be elements that should be across all. So
I
that,
think it's probably notice and decision is probably the only 2 elements that go across all, just because some have federal mandate requirements, some have not, some have state, some have deadlines that are federally regulated. Like they're going to be, even in federal decisions, like SNAP benefit determinations in front of the HSB, supposed to be a 30-day turnaround.
yeah.
Medicaid's supposed to be a 90-day turnaround. Like even those don't mesh.
Yeah.
So we're always, I think, just going to be limited to, yes, you should absolutely have notice of what your appeal rights look like, notice of what that procedure looks like, and a decision.
And a decision.
And that's probably the only 2 elements that match. And that's all I have, but I can answer any questions.
Okay, well, I'm sure there's some besides the ones I've been asking. Any questions? Go ahead, Representative McGuire.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, I have a lot of recommendations. So of all those current recommendations, what do you believe is feasible within the current resources?
Great question. I do think the timeliness piece is probably currently feasible within the current resources because those are already requirements. So those are requirements we should be hitting that exist. They existed with the structures that we set up. perhaps there are procedures that we can look at that make things more timely, but that's something that's really, I think, the biggest ask from us is to find a way to work out that timeliness piece because we do not want, it's the Medicaid cases in particular, we do not want that lack of compliance to risk our Medicaid funding.
And I went through the report and it's from all the statements that you have made. There's significant structural resource mismatches going on. It's just not a procedural reform. And, you know, it seems from this report, the amount of cases that are going up and to be addressed by just 3 people. Yeah, there's a lot of structural as well as procedural reform to go on. That's why I stated, went back to that original question. What is the one thing that we can feasibly establish with the current resources in place?
I think jurisdiction too might be another one, because if we limit the jurisdiction and we make that really clear, I would hope we are limiting the number of cases that they're hearing. So really limiting that scope, which would help with the timeliness piece too. I think those are probably the 2 big ones.
Thank you.
Representative Steady and then Representative Noyes.
So when people go and they bring these cases, do they pay their own costs or do the taxpayer pay it? Do they pay their own attorney to go?
Oh,
Or
I
is the
think
taxpayer paying the attorney.
it depends, right? So like there are Vermont legal aid attorneys, so they take cases, they're grant funded. Someone would have to fact check me on that. But there aren't attorneys. There are people who go without attorneys. I suppose you could also pay a private attorney.
I was just wondering who pays for it.
Other than Vermont Legal Aid and whatever grants that might go to Vermont Legal Aid, people bring their own attorneys or they appear without attorneys.
So how do they qualify for Vermont legal aid?
Financial,
Be taxpayer dollars.
it's a financial qualification. And then I think Vermont legal aid also gets to choose which cases they take based on their resources because they have limited resources.
Yeah, they testified last year. I might recall, and they were very clear that they do not take all the cases that come to them because they don't have the resources to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure.
Representative Noyes.
You spoke about the timeline or the trial time, like you referenced one that was 10 hours or something.
Yes.
Is that true? Could you expand on is there a need for us to limit how long these last, or is that
We talked about it.
counterproductive to really understanding the issues so that a good decision can be made, or?
Yeah, we talked about it. And I think the jurisdiction piece is really big for us because if we can limit the number of cases, maybe that doesn't matter as much anymore. But having lengthy, the 10-hour hearing in particular is the outlier, but the 10-hour hearing is causing us concern about what if every hearing were 10 hours, right? But we couldn't come up with a good recommendation. And this maybe collaborating more with stakeholders would give us an idea of what the average hearing is. But we couldn't come up with a good recommendation because we don't know what each case is going to look like from a fact-based perspective. But something like an opening statement or a closing statement, if that's something we can say, hey, you get 5 minutes to give us your opening statement. And then when we're talking about presenting evidence, I think it's really going to be up to the HSB hearing officer to start hemming in okay, we've heard this particular piece already. We have to move on to the next piece. So we did recommend there's a national training for hearing officers and a national certification that might help with docket management or particular hearings, especially because if there's any turnover and you get someone new who just happens to be a hearing officer for the first time, they're going to need those resources to really know what that looks like. How do you keep all of the parties in check and keep everybody on task and keep everybody civil too, which is something we mentioned.
And that would be a policy of the board, not us.
Right. You could order that. You could always put the training in legislation if you really wanted to.
No, and I appreciate you were talking earlier that you past experience was with the victims.
Mhm.
So having that background is probably very helpful to how the board works. So thank you.
It is.
I just have one final question, and that's you referenced the preference that the board take the cases in the order in which they're received. But I'm just wondering if there should be some prioritization based upon the deadlines, like the federal deadlines that exist. So whether it's a 30-day or a 60-day or a 90-day or whatever. Because that might actually assist in getting more timely
That's a good idea.
things. Okay. Because that wouldn't necessarily mean in the order that they're received.
Right.
Yeah,
That's true.
okay. All right, any other final question? Okay, thank you, Ashley, so much. We really appreciate the report, and we'll hear from Joe next week.
And if you need anything else, feel free. I can always come back.
Awesome.
Let me know. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, folks, that we will see you back here after floor. It's at 1 p.m. And